Welcome, welcome, welcome to Giant Travels by Van. Just time for a recap of the van building last week. Welcome back to Giant Travels by Van. Don't forget to enter in the comments if you think you know where the inspiration for today's intro came from. Today I'm going to show you how I built my cabinetry for the van. Let's get started. I had several goals that I wanted to accomplish in building my cabinets. That included some countertop space. I wanted a 4-inch tall drawer to hold small items, some upper and lower storage space. I have a lagoon table that I want to use in the van, so I needed to put the mount for the lagoon table there. And I wanted an open space below to accommodate my brother's legs while sleeping. So I started by scribing and fitting 2 vertical pieces of plywood in the van, and these would fall upon supporting ribs at the ceiling so that I could attach there for strength. You want to make sure these are fastened at a right angle to the wall, so I was using my square for that, and I was going to use rib nuts and angle brackets to get a good attachment to the wall. The scribe didn't need to be a perfect fit, since the ceiling I would be adding later would cover any reasonable amounts of gap that I would leave. I cut these out with my jigsaw and then used a flap sander and a drill and a rotary sander to get the plywood finished. I had roughed out the vertical spacing for the layout for each area in the cabinet after they were mounted, and this led me to a design where the upper cabinets would be recessed a little bit to open up a little more headroom for moving around in the van, and an open area in the middle. So I traced those measurements onto the plywood and then cut those out, matching both plywood sheets to be cut out the same. Mounting these in place in the van, I then cut out the countertop, which was notched for the right upright support, so it wrapped around it and let me use a single piece that went all the way forward to the side door. The spacing on the verticals was about 21.5 inches, and so to the right of that I just kind of cut a general curve back towards the wall to where it was only a few inches overhang by the time it got near the side door. For the fronts of the cabinets, I wanted to build them with a lip all the way around so that they could help hold items in and I wouldn't have to have doors mounted on them to keep it closed. To get the rounded corners that you want, just use any round object you have with the approximate radius that'll work for you. Lay it in there and trace from your straight lines to give you the curvature that you need. I then cut these out with a jigsaw and sanded them ready for painting. I had some Formica left over from a prior project at home, and so I decided to use what I had left, which would give me enough to cover both the countertop and the lower shelf. To put this on, you use spray adhesive. It's contact type. Spray some on the plywood, spray some on the Formica. I used some round dowels to support it when I initially placed the Formica down on the plywood. That way I can get it positioned accurately, and then you pull the dowels one by one from the middle towards the outside and press it down, locking it in place. The dowels help because you only get one chance at getting this lined up correctly, and my piece of Formica was pretty close fit lengthwise, so I needed to be as accurate as possible. To trim the Formica, I went to my router table and put a flush trim bit in and just ran the edge around the router bit. I also had to use my handheld router to get inside the slot for the rightmost upright vertical piece of plywood to get in there. So you could do this all with a handheld router, but that's pretty much what Formica requires, is some means to flush trim it all the way around. I was pretty happy with how it looked when it was all routed, and it gave me a good surface that should stand up better in the van over time. For the lagoon table mount, I thought that I could get by with actually less of the mount and wound up actually cutting it in half on my table saw. Even though it's pretty thick aluminum, you can cut aluminum on a table saw You just need to raise the blade slowly and make several passes at it, cutting just a little bit each time. The reason I did this is I didn't need the entire mount, since I would also be supporting the mount from the floor. I just needed it to be held against the wall here. So cutting it like this let me save a piece of it, and I may end up using it somewhere else in the van, and I'll be able to install the table 2 different places, or possibly even outside the van. Here you can see how the lower shelf would look with the front face on it, looking from the inside, with the bolts there that are going to hold the Lagoon table mount on the outside of it. To strengthen the assembly, I was going to use biscuit joints when I glued up everything. So that just means before you cut the biscuits, you want to line everything up, put some little marks where your center line is going to be for each one of the biscuits that you cut. And then you can see here I've cut the biscuits and inserted them. You want to do a test fit and make sure everything will lay up the way you want to do it. Cutting the biscuits is pretty straightforward. When you're working on the bottom shelf end biscuits, you simply lay them on a flat surface like I did here on my table saw and cut into them. For the vertical parts, as you see here, I used a support that I knew would give me straight up and down so that the biscuits aren't angled at all. And that'll give you a clean cut so that everything lines up perfectly. If you've marked and hit all your center lines when you cut all the biscuits, then everything should be ready to assemble. Here you can see that I've done a test assembly to make sure that everything fits with it laying on its side. But also notice that the vertical pieces have kerfs cut in them, which will allow me to use plastic T-molding, which is an inexpensive way to protect the edges and make them look nice on the cabinets. So I'd ordered some of that from Amazon and had cut the kerfs here in the middle using a slot router bit and my handheld router. From this angle you can see the countertop with the Formica and the lower shelf with the Formica on it. My plan was to do the glue up without the countertop longer shelf as part of the original glue up, and that way I could paint it and not worry about having to mask that off also and put it in later after painting and glue it in place. And this wound up working okay for me. Here's a little time lapse of me doing the actual glue up. Apologies that I didn't have the camera far enough back to see the upper part being glued, but it went together well. The final quality check you do on anything you build is, after you assemble it, did it come out to be square? And you can see that I've achieved that here on the shelving. Also, when I'd assembled it, I used my air brad nailer to put some brads in to hold it so the glue could set up with it held in place well. And that meant that I had some holes to fill afterwards. One of the things that will happen with this wood filler is it'll dry out over time, evaporating slowly, even with the cap on. So I find that if periodically you put a few drops of water in there and then work the packaging around to kind of mix it, you can make this last much longer. You can actually revive some that's gotten pretty dried out. And so I was using that here to fill all the holes. And after this dries, then I would sand it off and it'd be ready for painting. After the glue dried overnight, I wanted to see how the countertop shelf fit, and so I reinserted that to see the final look. Also, you can note that there's a space below that countertop shelf that I have to build a drawer yet to fit in there, and that's the 4-inch opening before you get to the lower storage area. All in all, I was very happy with the way it came out, and I was ready to move on to paint it and get it installed. All right, thanks for watching. For those of you wondering about the inspiration for today's intro, that clearly comes from last week tonight where John Oliver takes a comedic approach to revealing issues that we should all be taking a closer look at. Thanks, John. In my next episode, I'll paint and install the cabinet. See you soon. Taking a closer look at. Thanks, John. In my next episode. All right, thanks for watching. This thanks reveals issues in a comedic way that we all should be taking a better, closer, better, more better look at.